Hey everyone, welcome back to another podcast, Intersections Mission to Innovate. This is our interview series where we bring practitioners from different disciplines to share their insights and real-world stories. Prachi Sutanka and Quan Collins are our hosts of this podcast that's created through the Samaya Studio. Prachi, can you get us started today?
Yes, absolutely. Hey everyone. As you might know, through Samaya Studio, we talk about bringing inspiration to the innovation ecosystem to accomplish practices towards human and societal well-being. And a core aspect of that inspiration and that culture of innovation is mindfulness. Now, Kwan, if you and I, if you remember, we did some deep dives discussing the intersection of culture of innovation and mindfulness in our episode 3. And today, we are so pleased to have you here, Cristina. Cristina Lynn joins us in the studio, and she's a mindfulness expert and has her own yoga and wellness practice. Hi, Cristina.
Hello, ladies.
Hello. And Cristina also has her own amazing intersection going on, spanning across topics like the power of yoga, traditional Chinese medicine, and natural foods. And Cristina, I love your philosophy of change what we can, accept what we cannot. It's transforming me already, and I can't wait to hear your insights today. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what motivated you to get into this field in the first place?
Sure. Thank you, ladies, Prachi, Kwan, and Gracie for having me. It's a wonderful blessing to be here. And I will add, before I tell you all about me, is that mantra, change what you can change and accept. I always have to plug in, you don't always have to like it.
Yes.
You have to accept what you cannot change. And that's the hardest piece of it. And I will tell you that has become my mantra, I guess, building from my background all these years. My background, I graduated, married my high school sweetheart, and we actually put each other through college. I have a background in nursing. I'm an RN BSN, and I worked emergency room, chaos, and I worked occupational health services, more chaos, because I went into various different workplace settings to take care of people and help them with their health. And from there, I went to pharmaceutical sales, even more chaos. And then I became a mom. Oh my goodness. Even more chaos. And I'm a huge multitasker as well. So I was kind of, always had my hand in 10 different pots. With that, became a mom. This child was not well. So even more chaos became part of me. And from there, I left my pharma job and I became a singer-songwriter. So I was on the road, back and forth, playing music, making things happen. And as life continued to spiral up in positive ways, all kinds of stress, but positive stressors, along with some negative stressors, my health spiraled down. And that is where I learned the power of breath work. I laugh and tell people when I was as sick as I was, I didn't know I was doing yoga breath at the time. I was just using pranayama to settle my brain. And that's where the mindfulness kicked in. And that's where the asana, the poses, began to settle in. As my health spiraled back up, interestingly enough, I started going out and doing all kinds of other things and getting further away from my pranayama, further away from the asana practice, and further away from a meditation practice, a mindful practice. And guess what happened? My health was beginning to spiral once again. So I was blessed to return to a practice, and that's when I knew there was something magical about it. There is something magical about learning to quietly listen to your body.
I think we can share with our listeners, right, that Cristina is helping both Prachi and I through this magical journey of learning how to really bring this practice to life, and I guess put our money where our mouth is in terms of how this impacts our work and our ability to help our teams. So building on that, in episode 3, Prachi recapped that we talked about the intersection of mindfulness and this culture of innovation. And we talked about, managing chaos, sharing, trusting, like this whole collaboration that we talk about, right, with our first 2 episodes, that in order to do that well, right, that we all need to come into it with this mindfulness perspective, because through that, right, we really tap into our team's ability to share and trust and build and grow. And there's a lot of, literature out there that talks about PNS, the parasympathetic nervous system that we've talked about, right? And that activation of that side of your brain that allows for better welcoming of coaching and learning and all of that, which is all part of what we're talking about with this culture of innovation. So with all of that said, how do you define, I guess we want to start with definitions from your perspective. How do you define mindfulness for the purpose of this dialogue with what we're talking about within intersections?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the parasympathetic nervous system. Vaughn, is so important to learning how to tap into this mindful word that we keep saying, mindfulness. What is that? It is learning, I just said, quietly listening to your body. You're learning to settle and just be. I told someone the other day, it's learning to be a better version of who you were created to be. And that I learned when I did learn to just slow myself down. I mentioned earlier, we're multitaskers. Most women are, because that's how we get it done. But if you are multitasking to a point that all you are creating is more and more chaos and more work, then you're not listening to what your abilities are. You're not listening to who you are so that you can be the better you. And so as we learn to slow down, what happens is you'll find that you learn to breathe a little deeper. You learn to use your breath in a different way. And that is where I loved this word, where tranquility sets in. And that's when you learn to not push-pull, when you learn to not cling. You just learn to be. You learn to be, and you can do 5 different things, but you can focus as you breathe and you use that breath. I tell people, when you learn to slow yourself down, you slow your breath down, you slow your brain down, your heart and your mind, your body and your spirit can balance themselves. And all the clutter, all the stuff that is really not necessary that we try to make a priority in life, those priorities tend to fall in line with each other. Life becomes less cluttered, less chaotic, and it just becomes more clear. Ultimately, when we realize that we have slowed down enough, then therefore we connect to ourselves, we can love and respect ourselves. And I think what's beautiful, if you really think about it, it's only then that you can connect to other people. You can connect to your community. You can connect to your professional life in a very different, deep, meaning way. I read somewhere recently, we can actually make a life for ourselves, not just a living.
I love that, Cristina, especially that last sentence resonates quite a bit. And even that spectrum that you laid out for us, starting with slowing down, having that clarity and that connection, not only is that important in personal lives and, building your community, it's so important even in your professional aspect, right? And I wanted to kind of go back to that because a lot of our audience here, they are professionals. We've talked about what does mindfulness mean at work, at your workplace. And so, would love to hear from you, and based on all of your work, what are some of the techniques that you see in terms of bringing that mindfulness to your work, whether you are working on something independently, whether you are working in teams, whether you are presenting? There are so many different things, goes back to that multitasking that you were saying. We do so many different things in a traditional workplace these days that I think it's really important to step back and think through some of those techniques. And we would love to hear that from you.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of thoughts around this that's been going on. What works for me and what I have been blessed to share with several different people that I've been working with is you do begin with that mantra. I accept what I cannot change, but I can change. I can change what I can change, and I accept I don't have to like what I cannot change. And how we might do that is, yes, you have to step back. I tell people, slow your roll. Don't anticipate what's going to happen. Yeah, you got to have a bit of a plan, but you don't know the end product until it truly starts to open up. And, when you slow down enough to actually hear your breath, listen to what your mind is thinking, you actually realize that there are fewer and fewer mistakes happening. There are fewer and fewer communications being missed. Because if you slow down to truly read an email, I'll be honest with you, I'm still guilty. My husband will send me a message and he's like, I'll ask him a question later and he's like, did you read my email? No, I did not read it in its entirety, So we're all guilty of that. And I laugh. This is when you learn to slow down, it's a meditative process. Mm-hmm. You set a focal point. So when you begin working with a project, what is the focal point? When we work, ladies, with meditation, we may work on a color, or we may work on a word, or we may work on a big old oak tree. What is that focal point with work? What is the ultimate goal? If you're writing a paper or you're going into a meeting, what is the ultimate goal that you're searching for? You think about that, you breathe into that as an individual. Now, there's a lot of people that work under management. And, I tell people this kind of thought process, it truly needs to happen at the top. And Kwan, you and I were recently discussing that. And if the people at the top will begin focusing, honing in on what the ultimate goal is of the company, what's the ultimate goal of this one in particular project, then it's truly then that the people that are working for the different managers, they will tend to fall in line. And I don't mean that in a militant type of way. If a manager walks in and they have a set idea of what they want a meeting to look like, then they can set the tone. And that tone, they can send that tone out in an email. And then that tone can be set when you either meet in person or on a Zoom call. And then that tone spreads across the entire community of that project. Now, does that always happen? No, because do we always continue to focus when we have our focal point in a meditation setting? Well, we all know the answer to that, because we all have to smile at ourselves and be a little more gentle and loving and compassionate, and you just return back. You realize that, I did see that squirrel and I took off running that way instead of running towards the goal that was set. So again, I like to think about it this way, even for myself, is I have to be willing to grow myself. I have to be willing to step outside my comfort zone. Just do it. So when you learn to embrace growth, stress, that word stress keeps coming back, right? Stress can be good, bad, ugly, or really beautiful. But if you embrace it, you change in it what you can change, and you accept in it what you can't, and you just build from that, you learn from it, you grow from it, then you grow a growth mindset. And I think that that's what a lot of us need to be willing to do, is be willing to stretch ourselves just a little bit every day. Grow into that, grow a growth mindset. And, you might say, well, how do you grow that growth mindset? You set a daily intention. Where do I want to stretch myself today? How do I want to stretch myself today? I tell people a lot, even with what I do, I have to remind myself to be grounded. Because when we become fearful of a meeting or whatever it is you're walking into, that fear is going to take over. But if you ground yourself in your foundation, we talk a lot about foundation. If you ground yourself in that foundation, magic can happen, because you feel what? You feel safe. You feel safe to learn, you feel safe to grow, and that is when you can truly get your hammer, get your nails, put your tool belt on, and go to work.
I love that. It feels very subtle when we just talk about it. It's so profound, and it has, I mean, that magic, if we were to label it, right, I think it goes back to that parasympathetic nervous system activation and that renewal that you need in order to handle all of the complex ideas that we deal with on a day-to-day basis at work. So going back to that, right, you mentioned stress. And I think we want to make listeners understand that we're not saying that we're going to get rid of stress, right? There's no getting rid of stress, but it's recognizing what that stress is doing to us biologically that is preventing us from being open to new ideas, people, emotions, and these complex things that we have to deal with. So if we were to pick, right, if our listeners are like, okay, we got it, you told us a bunch about mindfulness and how important it is, what is the one thing that everybody should just do differently at work? So they're coming to work tomorrow and they've made the intention that they want to be mindful because they want to handle all these complex ideas. What is that one thing they should do differently?
The one thing to do differently, I believe, is, and I've learned it for myself, is, I bring my past. I bring all my 50 years to the table of any meeting I come to, right? Well, guess what? Everybody else at that meeting is doing the same thing. We all have been through stressful moments that were very bad. We've been through stressful moments that were very positive. Bring yourself, bring an open mind, bring an open heart, bring a mind of gratefulness for actually just getting to be there and getting to grow yourself. Just to quickly go into the difference of the sympathetic nervous system versus the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system that you've brought up a couple times is known as the rest and digest side of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight part of the autonomic nervous system. Basically, fight or flight, think about it this way, everything is ramping up, the heart rate, the blood pressure, the sugar levels, because guess what? You're getting to run from a bear. You're getting ready to run. When the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, everything is opposite of what I just said. Blood pressure regulates, pulse regulates, blood sugars regulate. The entire body is able to get the proper amounts of blood flow. That's all you got to know about that. So when you walk into a meeting, when you walk into a conversation with someone, what's important to remember is, where am I? And what we're looking for is a steady balance of those two. You have to go into meetings up and ready to give your all. So your blood pressure is coming up a little, your pulse is coming up a little, but don't allow that chaos to take you over. And I think the most important thing in any setting is to remember that we are coming together for that common goal, for that one thing that we're working towards, and that multiple different personalities are coming together. We all have a past. We all have a present, and yes, we all have a future. So we're all working hard. We're all living to hopefully make a good life and not just a living, what we just talked about. And so just walk into that meeting and be mindful, there's that word again, that there is everything, every emotion is coming into that room, where you may be leading the charge and you are joyful and hopeful for where that meeting's going to end up. There may be someone coming in that they're really struggling and they're going to wear that. And you may actually get a piece of that struggle if you ask them questions that they're maybe uncomfortable with because they haven't prepared. Who knows? So check yourself at the door and, learn how to control yourself. When you're asked a question, settle your breath. It goes back to that slowing down. Be mindful of the question and be mindful of who you are. And from that's where I believe true change, true magic, true work can get done. Because when we learn to refocus on the positives of what's coming into that room and accept. We may not like the negatives or whatever you want to call it, the stress coming into the room, and just be grateful. I go back to just be grateful for that moment.
Well, Cristina, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your time with us today. We're so grateful that you are part of our community now and have shared, tips and techniques for how we can be more mindful and use that to, build that culture of innovation and collaboration that we want in our organizations. I think all of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes, from the need for setting vision, having, psychological safety among our teams and better communication, you really you tied all of that together so beautifully with mindfulness in terms of setting common goals, setting the tone, having that safety to do the things you want to do, and setting that intention and recognizing our connectedness to each other.
What struck me is that all these days, you and I have been talking from the lens of organizational leadership, organizational strategy, things like that. But really, Cristina, you brought it home today for us, that the mindfulness is really, not even the different side of that same coin. It is that coin. I mean, it's all together, right? Mm-hmm. So that, I have to say, was like the most amazing insight for me personally. So thank you for that. And I will remember that phrase, every emotion is coming to the meeting, right? Maybe that's our phrase to remember before walking into any of those scenarios.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
So, Cristina, we are so grateful for you. Thank you again. We are honored to have shared this message with you and with each other and with our listeners. And thank you, Prachi, and thank you, Gracie, as always. Take care, and we'll see you at the next one.
What another spectacular episode from Prachi and Quan. Thank you, Cristina, for being the guest on the show. Bye, everyone. Make sure you stay connected by following us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at UAHI2C, and check out the Samaya Studio on LinkedIn. Onward and upward.